I think awesome. So today, you are going to be hearing from our team, Mariana Strategies. We are partners with organizations to create safe, inclusive, and high-performing workplaces. With a focus on high-stakes environments like national security, we bring deep expertise in navigating the unique pressures of civilian and military structures. Through tailored guidance and ongoing support, we help teams build trust, address challenges, and achieve their missions with integrity and confidence. So we envision a world where every individual, regardless of their background or identity, feels safe, supported, and valued in their workplace. So our work removes barriers like harassment, discrimination, and exclusion, creating cultures of trust and belonging. And in these environments, people can focus on their mission, collaborate with purpose, and contribute their best every day. So many of you may be familiar with our team, some of you may not. I am Michaela Collins. I am the Program Associate at Mariana Strategies, and I apologize for not being on camera today. My camera has not been working, but you do get to see my lovely static face. I will pass it on to my colleague Swati.
Thanks, Michaela. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Swati Shrivastava. I'm joining you today from Chicago, and I am an org consultant at Mariana Strategies. So just a little bit about myself. As a social psychologist and an organizational consultant, I have been doing DEI work in some form since the beginning of my career. What's attracted me has been the idea that we all come from such different places and spaces, and yet there is something that compels us to similar companies, organizations, names, brands, products, solutions, missions, or visions. So when we get together to do work, some things just fit. But some pieces, like how we interact with one another in the workplace, can get really misaligned. And it's the why this happens that has drawn me to DEI work. And the search for these answers is what continues to propel me. I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Audrey Ruffey.
Thanks, Swati, and thanks, Michaela, and thanks to all of you who've joined us today. It's really nice to see you. My name's Audrey. I am the founder of Mariana Strategies, and I want to tell you a little bit about why I do this work. You can read the bio information is on this page, but really at the heart of this is personal experience, right? My story started in 1975, before I was born, when my father, who had immigrated from Iran, moved to Chicago and met my mother, Elizabeth, who was from New Jersey, and they fell in love. She said he looked like Omar Sharif. I don't know if anyone remembers Omar Sharif, but they they married. They had 3 children. I was the oldest, and being part of an Iranian American Irish Catholic family made me sometimes an insider and an outsider in my own family. And that experience taught me that inclusion and belonging really matters in every environment. And I've felt it and known it in some workplaces that have been guiding lights. And the people who have made those workplaces like that have been guiding lights. And that's really what's propelled us as a team working towards making workplaces bring that to everyone. That's really at the heart of what we do and why we care so deeply about this work. And I speak for myself on that aspect of experience. We all bring different elements. I'm an attorney with experience in employment law and can happily talk about EEOC and Title VII, which we may well do later today. And Swati's experience with a PhD in psychology and survey research, decades of survey research experience, means that we bring different elements. And Michaela making sure that our practices are on point and that our trains are running on time means that we're able to bring to our clients what they need in this work. So I'm going to pass it back to my colleagues to talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. And as Michaela mentioned, please don't forget to put your questions in the chat.
So what are we talking about? What does DEI plus work look like during a second Trump administration? That is the question all on our minds. And how can we as organizations protect the important work toward inclusion that we have pursued just thus far? So we'll discuss what we might expect for the future of DEI plus efforts and how teams and organizations can build and sustain inclusive culture. And that includes practical strategies for how we can move forward and what you can do next. So let's go into the background a little bit. Why are we here? How did we get here? So DEI plus work, as you may well know, encompasses many different efforts. Diversity is about embracing the differences we all bring to the table, including ethnicity, age, gender, religion, and so many other aspects of how we identify. Equity is about treating everyone fairly, not just a select few, and providing opportunities to ensure everyone can thrive. And inclusion is about feeling valued and recognized for our contributions and feeling ultimately that we belong. But these DEI efforts have been challenged quite often recently, and that is often about the challenge to the status quo, to those who have power because of that status quo. And so the data shows us that according to an analysis of elections in 2020, white men held 62% of all elected offices, even though they make up just 30% of the US population. This is the context in which we find ourselves in, especially when it comes to the upcoming administration. So how do we move forward, and why do we move forward? Why are we even doing this if there's so much threat? The good news is DEI plus work is here to stay, and the research shows that diversity drives performance. To assess the link between diversity, DEI, and what we see in our workplaces, the Boston Consulting Group surveyed more than 1,700 companies across 8 countries to examine the relationship between managerial diversity, the presence of enabling conditions, and innovation outcomes. They examined the correlation of multiple aspects of diversity: gender, age, national origin, career path, industry background, and education, both individually and collectively. They found that companies with above average total diversity had both 19% higher innovation revenues and 9% higher margins on average. The presence of enabling conditions for diversity, such as fair employment practices, participative leadership, and top management support and open communications, is worth up to 12.9% in innovation revenue. So working with people who are different from you may challenge your brain to overcome the ways that we all stay stuck in our thinking, and it sharpens our performance. There's also a study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology where scientists assigned 200 people to mock jury panels. And it turned out that diverse panels raised more facts related to the case than homogeneous panels. and made fewer factual errors while discussing available evidence. So all of this evidence shows that diversity has a real impact on our workplaces and on how we are able to move forward in a better direction. And that evidence isn't going away. So how do we think about the threats to DEI plus efforts? For that, I'll turn to my colleague, Audrey.
Thanks, Michaela. I think it's really important to start with some of that data that you just shared around the benefits that are not just the financial benefits, the benefits to performance, to retention, engagement. These are things that are well documented. And that's why what you're going to see in this discussion is that DEI work is not going away. And it will continue, and in many of the same forms that it exists now. Something I need to flag here before I start is that this webinar is for informational purposes only. The information does not create an attorney-client relationship. I am not giving legal advice as I talk about some of the recent efforts to undermine DEI and what we think might happen moving forward. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the efforts that happened in the past, and then some of the coming attractions. So in September of 2020, Donald Trump issued an executive order on combating race and sex stereotyping. Now, this was an executive order, and so it was limited in whom it applied to: federal contractors, federal agencies, and federal grantees. A lot of what was in that executive order banned training programs that, in the view of the executive order, suggested that people were inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive due to their race or sex. That executive order was revoked when Joe Biden took office, and we anticipate that Joe Biden's executive order will be revoked and as Donald Trump takes office. So, a little bit about what that executive order included was that it prohibited conducting trainings that included divisive concepts. And we can get into that. Shorthand for that would be around the topics that became lightning rods, like critical race theory. Federal contractors were required to certify that they would not use workplace training that included these concepts. And that was a matter of compliance with their contracts. Similar with federal grants, funding recipients were prohibited from using federal funds for training materials that included these concepts. The executive order also created a complaint hotline so that employees and contractors could report violations of this. That's the executive order. And I think that we would anticipate something similar or more intense as the new administration starts. Next, Roberts versus Progressive Preferred Insurance Company. You might be more familiar with this as the Hello Alice lawsuit. In this case, what happened was the Hello Alice grant program that was offering funds that exclusively to Black-owned small businesses and supported by Progressive Insurance in collaboration. This grant program, they would provide $25,000 to 10 Black-owned small businesses to purchase commercial vehicles. The claim that was brought and ultimately dismissed was that an individual who's a white man received the email about the grant, and when he discovered the eligibility requirement, he did not apply. This was the basis of his lawsuit, and he contended that the racial criterion prevented him from competing equally for the grant. In the end, the Northern District of Ohio dismissed the case for lack of standing, but something interesting is the decision in the implementation of the grant funding process moving forward is that it would remove the race-based eligibility criteria in subsequent grant programs. So that change was made moving forward. And I think that we see a lot of letters being sent to intimidate on the basis of the backgrounds on cases like this had to have a chilling effect. And that's obviously something that we'll be contending with in the future. And while the suit was ultimately unsuccessful, it was dismissed for lack of subject matter jurisdiction. There's still a presence of the challenges around preferences on the basis of identity, and we'll talk a little more about that. We also, and I know that some of the folks here on this call are impacted directly by state legislation banning DEI plus efforts in higher education. As of the middle of last year, there were 40-ish bills aimed at restricting DEI initiatives in public institutions of higher learning, and this was across nearly 24 states, whether it was to prohibit funding for DEI offices or staff, whether it was to ban mandatory diversity training, to eliminate the use of diversity statements in hiring and promotion, or to restrict consideration of race or ethnicity in admissions decisions. And that's a big one. We'll talk a little bit about the Students for Fair Admission Supreme Court case in a moment. But at the state level, where public funding goes is an important question, and one that everyone here in the course of work, it'll be really important that your counsel speak with you directly about any state-based legislation that impacts your work directly. And I know that that's happening right now for some of the folks on this call. So where does that leave us now? There's the state-based issues. At the federal level, if you are a federal contractor, if you are an executive branch agency, if you are a federal grantee, you can expect some additional challenges. And as they come in, we'll be talking about them. In 6 weeks' time, we'll need another discussion. But this is to anticipate what's coming forward. The Dismantle DEI Act of 2024, this was introduced in June by Senator Vance, seeking to eliminate all federal DEI programs and associated funding, would rescind executive orders related to DEI, close DEI offices, terminate chief diversity officers, and prohibit mandatory training. The idea being that we would cut back as strongly as possible. Even the terminology of DEI is a thing that we're aiming to address. That's something coming from the Project 2025 recommendations. And that's really where the most stringent action is potentially coming from. We would anticipate, from what Project 2025 talks about, would be even the prohibition of demographic data collection. Those of you who are in Organizations with more than 100 people are probably making EEO1 reports right now on the collection of demographic data because it gives us insights into our workplaces. Project 2025 recommends that prohibition and really a reformation of civil rights enforcement. This would be a desire to restructure civil rights enforcement and remove the disparate impact standard, which would make it exceedingly difficult to prove discrimination unless it was overtly intentional. So challenges ahead. But that's not where we're leaving you. We want to talk about what the path forward is. And this is really important. What are the ways that we can be smart and successful in pursuing efforts that create inclusive workplaces, that value diversity, and ensure that people are treated equitably? And again, while this is not legal advice, speak with your counsel about how your specific programs are impacted by legislation in the states where you work. What we anticipate is that we're going to have a new executive order in 6 weeks' time. It will be influenced by these Project 2025 goals. At the same time, there are many laws that protect against discrimination in the workplace. And as we saw in the Hello Alice lawsuit, we expect those laws to be used to target programs that are aimed at creating opportunity for individuals from historically marginalized communities. But let's talk about how to thread that needle and do it effectively. So DEI plus efforts, it's an umbrella. It covers a lot of different kinds of activities. And because of that, we're not going to talk about DEI itself being risky or not risky, okay? What we're going to talk about is that DEI efforts can be risky when 3 things are present. If it confers a preference, if some individuals are treated more favorably than others, and that preference is based on a legally protected group. For instance, within Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, those categories of protected identities, race, color, religion, national origin, sex, and sex includes sexual orientation, gender identity, status of being transgender, okay? And those preferences create a benefit, like a job, pay raise, a beneficial work assignment, access to development, training, promotion, right? So when those things are present, we're likely to see greater risk, okay? That riskiness looks like things that include making a decision. If you have 2 strong candidates and you make a decision that prefers one person over another on the basis of a protected category, race, religion, color, national origin, sex, or hiring quotas. If you have eligibility into beneficial activities like fellowships that are group specific only, or having compensation be tied to goals around diversity in hiring, not inclusion in hiring. For instance, saying that bonuses might come if you hire more women on your team. That would be a very risky thing to do. On the other hand, were you to have a compensation program that said, in your performance review, you're going to be evaluated on the basis of the experience of inclusion in the workplace, perfectly reasonable. Okay. So what I just described are programs where somebody is experiencing a preference on the basis of a protected category, and they get a real benefit, a promotion, a raise, participation in a fellowship program. Okay, now these are places where it's entirely possible we'll see challenges. There is clearly a supermajority of conservatives on the Supreme Court who may point in that direction as being something that they would act on. Okay. But even understanding those points can give us a sense of where we can go to avoid this risk, right? So unsurprisingly, one of the big events that's occurred in our landscape here is the Students for Fair Admissions case from last June. And it will have an impact on what we do and how we look at this. And that's where nuance is required, right? Let's talk a little bit about that. Okay. So understanding the background of the Supreme Court decision that effectively removed race from admissions decision-making in undergraduate institutions. What it didn't prohibit was taking into account individual experiences and how it impacted your life and the way that you see yourself in this institution, that program that you're applying for. So that's something that we will be able to continue to value going forward. Again, the quotas are likely in the workplace to receive a scrutiny that would make it very challenging to continue. But the individual experience of being a person of color, having a disability, the elements of personal identity that bring a richness into our workplace is information that is still incredibly important for us to have. So I want to talk about what efforts you should feel good about continuing. Okay? Many forms of DEI plus efforts are going to be lawful. And I'm going to read out a number of them, but thinking about this, increasing your pipeline and thinking about the context of inclusive hiring practices. We want to broaden our candidate pools. We want to have mentorship, coaching programs, things that are open to everyone, that really do benefit individuals who have not had access to those programs in the past. We want structured interview processes that benefit people who may experience, be the recipients of bias in the workplace, right? We're going to continue employee education, right? We're going to bring a focus on promotion processes that remove bias. And the extent to which that our DEI programs don't confer a preference on legally protected groups, again, race, sex, religion, national origin, color, these are probably going to be safe, okay? So talking about things like workplace systems, right? That's the component of inclusive hiring and retention, really leveling that playing field. We can still do important work thinking about the ways in which job advertisements and interviews, outreach, that these things are affected by unconscious bias. And we can work to undermine that bias and do a far better job in creating more robust processes for hiring. And then once someone's in the position, that thoughtful allocation of work assignments, the elements of evaluation processes and performance reviews, these systems all require shining a light to understand where bias comes in, to undermine that bias in the workplace. It's hugely important. Okay, so thinking about that, I would also recommend the skills that increase inclusion in the workplace. That's both these universal frameworks and inclusive practices for skills building. Okay, so thinking about the ways in which we create the experience of being valued, trusted, and able to be our authentic selves at work, when people are bringing empathy, when they are creating psychological safety on their teams, when they are really leaning into cultural competence, then everyone benefits. And that's clear from the research on what creates a more inclusive workplace, right? And thinking about DEI initiatives that are universal and that don't benefit one group over another are going to remain safe. What we'd like to see is that the rising tide lifts all boats. We want leaders especially to develop the DEI related skills that they need to be more inclusive, to have greater understanding of individuals from backgrounds that are different from their own, understanding why biases come up and how to actively work to remove them in their personal efforts as leaders, and to really set that standard. You can do that without articulating the kinds of challenges that come up with the label of DEI. There's a lot in there. Even more we could recommend around the ways that we would review employee benefits. We want to ensure that they're being applied equitably. Ensuring that flexible work arrangements are supported and expanded. Avoiding things like office housework, and ensuring that it's fairly distributed rather than where it normally falls on individuals in the workplace. More often than not, it falls to women, to people of color, and ensuring that that's not the case. So there's a long list of programs that we could talk about that would advance DEI without triggering the executive order or even the dismantle DEI type limitations. But those are some of the elements that come up both from executive orders, legislation, where we see, looking at the laws, there's some elements of risk and some work that's more fairly safe. I want to turn it over to Swati to talk a little bit about the social context, the historical context, and actions relevant in that moment.
Thanks, Audrey. So, as you can tell by now, we're making a very conscious decision to remain agile during this time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the social science behind why we're making this decision and why we encourage all of you to do the same. So let's start with the concept of opportunity structures, right? Opportunity for social movements it always goes through ebbs and waves. Sometimes those structures are open and sometimes they're closed. And what does that mean, right? Recently, we had momentum, allies in high places, the wind at our backs in terms of public sentiment about DEI, and opposing movements were relatively silent and calm. They didn't have much of a leg to stand on when every woman was coming out of the woodwork to say, hey, me too, or when we all watched footage of George Floyd being humiliated and murdered. But just as opportunity structures open suddenly, they can close just as quickly. And that's what's happening now, right? We now find ourselves in the DEI backlash era. And that can be really disheartening. It can seem like, all right, it's over, we lost, or I really don't know what to do in the middle of this. But research has shown that sometimes movements go into abeyance, What that essentially means is that the strong networks and identities that were built in the up phase of change continue nurturing the efforts during periods of stagnation and less visibility. So let's talk about how we can learn from and lean on success stories from other social movements and also DEI work from the past 60 years, because yes, that is how long workplace DEI efforts have been around, so that we can continue to do this work even if it's under the radar. Let's start with sustaining networks, right? Sustaining the networks of the people who are already engaged in this work. What is all over the news right now is that DEI roles are being cut. What's not as flashy is the realization that all those professionals, all the CDOs, the practitioners, the DEI work groups that pulled together and did the work, the training, the knowledge and skills building post-2020, that means that our network of experienced DEI advocates and allies is now more robust than ever. And wherever these professionals go, whatever they do, they will be bringing that knowledge and those skills to that work. So in some ways, this backlash is helping to cross-pollinate all of that knowledge and all of those skills. Now, according to Alison Dahl Crossley in her study of millennial feminists, in a time of closed doors, maintaining those networks through gatherings, as the emerging women's movement did in the 1960s, can be an effective tactic to sustaining momentum. And that's what we're going to do. Second, we want to think about integrating the work to propel your business strategy and make connections to the mission. What is your why for this work anyway? When your answer connects to the mission of your team or the market goals of your product, it's undeniably essential to the success of your organization. One chief diversity officer gave the example that if we don't connect to the business, people will not care. Her company creates products so that managers care how their diverse customer base gains access to those products. So in other words, to debunk the myth that DEI is for DEI's sake, CDOs are viewing their business and product strategies through a DEI lens, even if they don't call what they're doing DEI. Linking customer access to sales is how to convince people that this work is important. Next, we want to think about those trigger words, right? Audrey mentioned that earlier. And yes, that might mean reframing the DEI label for survival. And we know this is a contentious area. But what matters most is the content, not the label. And we know from decades of social movement research that reframing an issue is often necessary for a movement to draw in new supporters and sustain itself in the face of criticism or closed doors. For example, consider the environmental movement and the way nature conservation was reframed as sustainability, and then climate change, and more recently, climate justice. And even now, climate change is often labeled by some people as a hoax. But guess what? In April of this year, there was a landmark study published in the journal Science that provided the strongest evidence to date that not only is nature conservation successful, but that scaling conservation interventions up would be transformational for halting and reversing biodiversity loss and reducing the effects of climate change. The work didn't stop, and it can't stop. And similarly, whether it's been diversity, D&I, DEI, DEIA, DEIB, DEIABA, DEI+, whatever it is, what started as a subset of HR functions in the 1960s evolved to a business imperative in this last decade. So don't worry, the work isn't going anywhere. And in fact, it's only going to evolve. It has to, because As we just stated, we now have more skilled allies than ever to drive it forward. And finally, kind of like what we're doing here today, we preach to the choir, at least for now. Some people are backing down or backing off of DEI work. Well, we're not so sure that those people were truly committed to this work in the first place. Other people are doubling down, and that's great. Those are our allies, the people who are truly committed to DEI and willing to get the work done. And then there's opportunity. There are some people who are nervous or disheartened, and that's where we have potential. The same way we're having this conversation with you today about what it is and what the plan is, you can be that beacon for others in how you talk about this work, how you model it in your workplace. This is the way to lead others in it as well.
So we have covered a lot of information. And so after this call, you will get a document with all the references that we have mentioned in this discussion, as well as a recording of this webinar. We hope that this sets you up for moving forward, and we hope to be a resource to you as well.
So let's just take a quick review of the actions that we recommend. Updating strategies so that you have those frameworks that are universal, ensuring they apply to upskilling everyone, to removing bias in our efforts for creating a more inclusive workplace, even creating that more diverse workplace, because as Swati was talking about, it supports our mission, it supports our bottom line. We are suggesting that we move to content, away from cohorts of individuals that belong to a certain background or identity. The recommendations around removing eligibility requirements that are tied to demographics. And it could be expanded to individuals of any background who have a commitment to the content of the work. That can be a very powerful way to ensure that programs are continued. And thinking about this work will take some threading. We want to think through, and we can even come with the formulation that was permitted by the Supreme Court in the Students for Fair Admissions, because there, even though it applied only in the context of undergraduate admissions, we anticipated having an impact on workplaces as well. Individuals can speak to how race or other aspects of identity have affected them in their lives, whether it's the elements of experiencing discrimination or inspiration. The way that we talk about individual experiences is going to be a powerful way to move this forward. What we're going to do here is we have a few more slides. Then I'm going to turn off the recording and we can get to some questions.
And when you're not sure how to drive this work, we're here. Mariana Strategies is your partner in building a workplace culture that works for everyone. Are you unsure about the current state of your workplace? Well, we can help with culture assessments. Do you know that your people are hungry for knowledge and skills building to create better culture? Our workshops are designed, again, as Audrey mentioned, to fit your leadership development frameworks: psych safety, emotional intelligence, risk-taking, conflict resolution. And most importantly, we are your consulting partners to help identify the path forward in this era.
So what are we looking for from you for today? We're going to put some links in the chat, and we're going to ask that you share your email so that we can keep in touch and get resources to you, such as updates to this webinar and this discussion. We'll put a link in the chat for how to set up a time to talk with us, if that's helpful for you too. But right now,